My name is Alan Herman. I'm your moderator today. The session is called Working with Local Governments and Community Leaders. Our panelists today are Robin Kaufman from Metro Transit, Nick Lemmer from Rochester Transit, and Emily Murray from the Association of Minnesota Counties. As kind of practices today, if you have something that you would like to ask, please put it in the chat box. I will be monitoring the chat box for questions and so forth, and kind of going through that presentation. If it is, if your question is specific to a certain presenter, if you could put that on there also, that would be great. Our first presenter today is Robin Kaufman. She is from Metro Transit. Robin is the Director of Administration for Metro Transit. In this role, which she started in January, she oversees community relations, outreach, and administrative coordination for the agency. Ms. Kaufman started at the Metropolitan Council Community Development Division in 2001 as a sector representative planning analyst and moved to the light rail projects in 2006. Ms. Kaufman has a Master of Urban and Regional Planning degree from the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, U of M, a BS in Environmental Studies from the College of Natural Resources, University of Minnesota. Welcome, Robin.
Welcome, and thank you. Thank you for having us. I am going to be talking here. Let's see, sharing my screen. Presentation. Let's see, is that showing? Showed up?
Yes, you're good.
Great. Well, thank you, and good morning, everybody. Today, I'm going to talk about, first of all, our overall approach to public engagement, and then I'm also going to talk a little bit about what we've learned. We did kind of an extensive month-long engagement effort that we called Listening and Learning Through Crises in summer 2020. I'm going to share a little bit about what we learned through that process. So to get started, one of the things as Alan mentioned, I just started this position in January of this year. I was working on the light rail projects and doing public involvement and engagement for the light rail projects, and I just assumed this new role at Metro Transit doing doing the agency, Metro Transit's agency-wide public involvement process. And so I've been going through and making some changes in how we handle customer relations and public involvement. And one of the first things that, or one of the things that we're just starting to roll out now is that we are revising how we are assigning our outreach staff. So we previously had outreach staff that were assigned by project, and that worked great for internal communications and coordination efforts, but it was a little bit more challenging for the community because if you had a community that had 4 projects in it, you could have 4 outreach coordinators, and it was confusing to know who to go to and who to talk to about different projects. So we are just rolling out a new process where we are assigning outreach coordinators by district, and you can see the map there on the side, and that basically is going to mean that each of the outreach coordinators really gets to know the community that they're working in. They get to know kind of what the issues are, they get to know what their preferences are, and it allows the community to get to know the outreach coordinators. So as we're also working on engagement, this is the general process that we're setting up. We're, got a few projects that we're engaging on right now. Just we've resumed. We kind of had things on pause for a little bit due to COVID, and now a lot of our projects are picking up. So this is the new approach that we're taking. The first is to really understand the target audience, and as we're thinking about who our audience is, what's the geographic area that we're looking at, what are the demographics of that area, and then also who are the stakeholder groups. Are we mostly focusing on residents or businesses or even property owners, depending on what the topic is. And you can see here on the slide, these are a few examples of how we look at, our demographics, and you can see most of our riders are under 30 or under 35 years old. And we also have 45% of our riders are people of color. And so we need to take age and cultural and racial considerations into consideration as we're developing our engagement process. And understanding your audience matters. Different communities have different preferences, different ages have different preferences. People may have different access to technology. There may be language barriers, time and location considerations. Are people able to get to meetings, and what time can they get to meetings? And this is just the graphics on the slide. The side of the slide are just kind of an example of how you can't just pick like one Facebook or one social media. Like if you're deciding you're going to do social media engagement, different Facebook or different social media venues have different audiences. So you can see Facebook is broadly used by a lot of people across the age spectrum. Twitter, it's lower percentages than you might think, and Instagram is leaned more towards the younger generations. So you want to take, that was just one example. You may take other preferences or language barriers, may do a similar analysis as you think about your methodology. As you're also doing engagement, think about what your purpose is. Are you thinking you just want to inform people, seek input from them, or really have them advise and help you with decisions? If you want someone if you're just going to inform them about something, you probably don't want to, create a advisory committee and have an extensive outreach, because it might set the expectation, the different than what you're intending. So really think about what your purpose is and develop strategies that target that. And then always communicate how you're going to use the information. People, when they want it, if they're going to take time to do a survey, they really want to know how are you going to use the information? Is my 10, 15 minutes to take a survey, is it really going to be worth it? And how are you going to use it? And then also determine the appropriate scale. There's so many tools and techniques now. You can do social media and online meetings and in-person meetings and, so many different strategies, but really think about the scale, and you don't necessarily need to do everything, but maybe pick a few strategies that are going to work well. And then also set goals for your engagement. So, what are the goals? What's your target audience? How many people? Like, how are you going to know when you're going to be successful? So an example might be, if we're looking at doing a engagement on some changing some transit stops along a specific route, we may, want to consider, how many people are along that route, and what would we consider a success? Like, do we want to talk to, if there's 2,000 people, do we want to talk to all 2,000 of them? Or would 200 give us a good sample? So, set those goals so you know if you've achieved them, or if you need to continue doing some more efforts. And then develop a detailed plan. You can see on the right side of the screen is kind of a sample of what I've used in the past, where you start really actually documenting, what's the background, what's your purpose, and again, what's your goals, and then really detailing things out in detail. Think about what the steps are. And I think one thing too to consider is what's the internal communication. So if you're going to be going out and doing a broad public engagement process, you need to inform some internal stakeholders or even external stakeholders before you do that. So, do you need to communicate to your city council or your county board members, or maybe the commissioner that represents that district? Are there legislators that might be important to include? And then are there cities? So if you're overlapping, is it important to communicate and give a heads up to some of your external stakeholders? And then really assign leads to each of the tasks, and always track the progress. And so that's a really high overview of our engagement process. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we learned through our crisis, listening and learning through crisis effort that we did again in August. And this you'll kind of see as we go through this mirrors this process that I just went through. So why we engaged, first of all, we had a lot of projects that were underway at Metro Transit, and we had done a lot of extensive outreach in 2019, and we're starting to look at, implementing those plans starting in 2020 or even 2021. And we just realized, we got all this great information, but do we really need to kind of do a timeout and see if anything's changed with COVID, transportation needs? We had the killing of George Floyd and a lot of damage to buildings and businesses in the core cities. So, you know, did their destinations change? Did their needs change? And so we really kind of did a pause, and we also wanted to see how people are now wanting to communicate, because public meetings are really not a good way to communicate right now. So we set that goal. We said if we get 1,000 responses, that would be that would be fabulous. We also wanted to make sure that the responses are representative of our community. So we are targeting 45 responses from 45% people of color. Again, that was reflective of our ridership. And so we did, I'm not going to read through the whole list, but we did a variety of tactics just to see how we got good response, or what we got good responses on. You know, use social media, traditional communications, ethnic radio, and media. And we still did some on-site. You know, we tried to determine what are people comfortable with, and maybe doing some on-site intercept type surveys. And then we also reached out to community groups as well. And this is the results. We did hear from a racially diverse group. You can see we did end up actually exceeding our goals, and communicated or got surveys from 1,800 people. And we did almost achieve our goals with getting 41% response of people of color. And you can see on the slide, the lower chart shows the racial and ethnic breakdown of our ridership pre-COVID, and you can see the top shows the breakdown by that we heard from during our engagement. And we also heard from a representative area. We were really targeted on our core routes, that transit routes. And so you can see here, this is a map. We asked demographic data, and we also asked zip code data. So we're able to map and show where people were coming from. So you can see the data. The results are really focused along where a lot of our core routes are. And what we learned is that the demographics and responses are very different depending on if you did the online or the in-person survey. You do get different responses. And so because of that, we decided we do need to make sure that we use multiple strategies to make sure that we're engaging everybody. We also learned some things are more effective than others. We did do some paid promoted ads on Facebook, and you know, we had really good views. 6,000 people viewed it, but we only had 40 people that actually clicked through, and we weren't able to determine how many people actually completed the surveys. We also did paid ads and some social media, and that actually was very successful. And the other thing we learned is that a lot of communities, they just don't have capacity for meetings and engagement. And this is just some bar charts showing that survey methods matter. You can see on the left side, that's the racial breakdown of the in-person surveys. It's almost 50%, or a little over 50% were Black or African American, and less than a quarter were white. But then you look at the online, and it's very weighted towards white responses. And we also noticed that about 25% people didn't respond on race. And what our research staff tells me is that that's usually a lot of the people that opt not to fill that in are usually people that are white. And then we also learned about outreach strategies. So this is a slide that just shows the different outreach topics. We asked people, are you willing? The blue is very willing and able to participate in different strategies. White is willing but not preferred, and the red or orange is not willing at all or able. And so what we learned is that people are really willing and able to do online surveys, doing comment forms online. People are not interested right now in doing in-person. Those are the bottom 3 lines. And there is some moderate interest. The top 2 lines, those are doing some online meetings, moderate interest, but really not preferred. And how we're using this, we're basically, we've got a research staff that have put this into a tool where people are able to go kind of delve into the data by department. So they're going in and looking for keywords, like they can query for the Route 32 or 21 and see if there's comments on that. And we're also starting to communicate with the community what we're learning. We're in the process right now of updating our website. And so a little simple tool that generated those charts will be available online. And we're starting to present this out to community groups and also internal staff as well. And so if you have any questions, you can contact me with any questions or information, and you can check our website. It should be up by the end of the month. So on that, I will turn it back to Alan and the rest of the panel.
Sounds good. We do have one quick question for you now, I think we'll take. Was Metro Transit able to compensate or incentivize participation? In other words, were you able to offer a nominal gift card for groceries, or if so, how did that impact who responded?
That's a good question. When we did a lot of the on-site surveying, we found that we would get better participation if we provided some sort of benefit or resource. So what we did is we have a program called TAP. It's a $1 reduced fare program. And so we would do sign-up events. We promote the sign-up events so they could come sign up for the $1 reduced fare, and then we would survey them at the same time. Another thing that we did is we distributed masks. We had a lot of our operators and our police department that would be out at sites distributing masks to our riders. And so we'd hand them a mask or a packet of masks, and then conduct the survey. We are doing some surveying now for Network Next, and we were providing like a little fare, like a free fare voucher as well.
Sounds great. Thanks for that answer,
I'll
Robin.
stop sharing.
Sure. Correct. We'll go on to our next presenter, who is Nick Lemmer. Nick is Communications Coordinator at Rochester Public Transit. Prior to joining the City of Rochester, Nick held several posts in marketing and communication in public and private settings. Nick has taught courses in marketing at Winona State University and Rochester Community and Technical College. Welcome, Nick.
Okay, can everybody see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Alan and Robin. That was outstanding. I took lots of notes, and I may be following up with you. Just a great amount of information. So the perspective I'm going to share with you today is from Rochester. Rochester Public Transit is a unit of local government. So we're an enterprise of the City of Rochester. We are actually embedded in what we call the Development Services and Infrastructure Department. And so to that degree, much of our initiatives, advancing our initiatives, depend heavily on our ability to work with our local government officials and have an understanding about what our priorities are moving forward. So what I call the three-legged stool for initiatives is really talking about how we methodically move things forward. And the first is policy guidance. You know, it's important that we have an understanding of the priorities, not of just the City Council, but also City Administration, who works closely with Council. It also it develops an understanding of things like planning initiatives, zoning, for example, and land use policies can have a big impact on transit and vice versa. And so we work really closely with our elected officials and administration to make sure that we align from a policy and priority perspective. I should mention also that regionally, Rochester's governed by a metropolitan planning organization, as many areas are. And so we work closely with Olmsted County. ROCOG is Rochester Olmsted Council of Governments, and they do our regional long-range transportation planning. So there's that policy guidance as well. Staff analysis and recommendation really means building trust over time with those elected and those who are in charge of policy, so that they understand that the work that we do to come to the City Council with recommendations is really based on careful analysis and really just understanding the planning and priority initiatives. And finally, sometimes we do rely on consultants. It's hard to be a prophet in your own land, as they say. So when we bring these initiatives forward to policymakers, oftentimes it's in consultation with consultants. And finally, the third leg is public engagement. And this is what Robin went over in great detail. It was really an outstanding presentation. Local government really directly impacts the lives of people. And so we are increasingly upping our game when it comes to public engagement. And we're choosing to be very intentional and systematic, where in the past, I think public engagement had always been part of initiatives and policy development, but I think more recently, some real intentional effort has been put behind not only adding the staff here in city government, but also doing some fairly systematic outreach efforts. And I'm going to go into some of those in detail a little bit later in the presentation. And I think it's the last point I want to make when you're talking about dealing with local government is the idea of finding a champion. And that can be a policymaker, it can be a member of staff, it can be a member of the public. But it's really important that you have that champion, someone who's ready to speak to the project, the initiative, move it forward, continue to stand behind it, and to really be that champion in order to keep things moving along, keep an eye on things. So that's really working with our local government. What's one thing unique to Rochester is what we call Destination Medical Center. And you may have all heard of this. It's a 20-year, $5.6 billion economic development initiative. This is no small thing. It's a combination of primarily private investment. Most of that $5.6 billion is private investment. But there's also a good deal of public investment, about nearly $600 million that primarily directed toward infrastructure from sources in state government, county government, and from the city of Rochester here. And the idea behind this initiative is really to make Rochester the kind of place that will generate a huge benefit for the state in general, including job creation, tax revenues, both at the state and local level, as well as this idea of developing the region and the state and their reputation as being a global center for health and wellness. So what's unique about dealing with Destination Medical Center and the projects that come out, the infrastructure and transit projects that come out of the DMC initiative, is most large projects do involve both approval of the DMCC board, which meets quarterly, and the city council. And so we oftentimes find ourselves kind of trying to get the timing just right on getting these sort of initiatives approved by both this DMCC is a corporation with whose board members are appointed by the governor. So getting these initiatives to align from a timing perspective to get them in front of both of these entities is a little bit tricky. This just gives you an idea of what we mean when we say DMC. It's divided into 6 sub-districts. Just recently at the last DMCC board meeting, the district that you see along the west or the left side here has been extended to include what we're calling the West Transit Village. And you'll hear more about that when I tell you about the Rapid Transit Project. But that's DMC. As I talk about public participation and engagement, this is one tool in particular that we found really, really helpful. And I'm going to give you what's called the IAP2 public participation spectrum. And you can see it's got a number of different basically steps that indicate different levels of engagement. This slide is intentionally blurry, quite frankly, because this is material that is the trademark of the IAP2 organization. I encourage you to go out and engage with these folks and find out more information. But really what it is, it's a series of steps that increasing impact that the public can have on any particular project or process. It starts with inform. I mean, with each of these steps, we have sort of a promise that we make to the public. With the informed step, we promise to keep you informed. And we do that through tactics that you're probably all very familiar with: fact sheets, open houses, website information. As we move down, consult is a little bit more impact that the public can have. In this circumstance, we promise that we'll keep you informed, that we'll listen and acknowledge all of your concerns, and that we'll provide you information about how your concerns, information you shared with us, how that information has helped shape our final project. So that's kind of what we mean when we say consult. Involve goes a little bit deeper. So we work with you to ensure that the concerns are directly reflected in the final work product. Collaborate goes one step further. This takes the shape of advisory committees, a co-design process, which I'm going to describe next. And really what this means is we're going to look for your advice. We're going to involve you in formulating the final solutions, and to the maximum extent possible, collaborate fully with members of the community. And empower is that sort of the biggest way that the public can have an impact on a project. And that's really just saying, this is your decision to make, whether it's by referendum or some other process, but putting the decision really in the hands of the public. I'll just say a couple more things about this tool. One of the great things is it establishes a shared vocabulary, if you will, so that both internally and with the public, there's really no misunderstanding of the level of engagement or participation we're expecting within a given project. In order to build goodwill over time, I think people have to feel that they've been heard, but they also have to know to what extent their opinions will have an impact on the project. And having this kind of a spectrum, having this sort of shared vocabulary really reduces the amount of confusion or misunderstanding as we move forward with big projects. So I encourage everyone to take a look at the IAP2 spectrum as a tool. I'm going to move ahead here. And again, this is all widely available on the web, and they have great training tools. And so I encourage everyone to take a look at that. And the second example I want to give you of engagement strategies is what we're calling the co-design process. Now, this is something sort of new to the city. It really is, it falls into that consult, so one of the very highest levels of public participation, or excuse me, collaboration. So it falls into collaboration, one of the higher levels of participation. It's really what we're talking about is taking folks and really making sure that the people who are most impacted by the projects and the programs, that they're part of the process. So it's a framework that creates these formalized opportunities and creates a sense of power sharing and shared decision making. I think it was Jill at yesterday's workshop. Jill mentioned how there's a little bit of fatigue among members of the community who are often being asked to participate in these processes, but rarely are they compensated. So one of the big differences with this co-design model is we acknowledge the value of the contribution that these co-designers make by actually compensating them. So we have a small honorarium, we cover expenses for childcare, things like that. So it's a little bit more of a formal process. We have to have W-9s and things like that. In some cases, a public application process, but it all goes to making those members of the community feel more valued. And then finally, the thing I'll mention is this is a really real shift in emphasis from learned experience or taught experience, education, to lived experience in the community. We are looking for people who can represent, otherwise unrepresented portions of our community. We're looking for people who can represent the perspectives of those communities and from a lived experience standpoint, not from a learned experience standpoint. So I'll get into some examples here. Discovery Walk was a DMC project, and this was really the pilot project for the co-design process. And I have to give a nod to all my colleagues at the DMC EDA, including Kevin Brighton, Patrick Sieb, and Bill Von Bank and others, who worked with the University of Minnesota Design Center to come up with a process that took Discovery Walk, which is this stretch of 2nd Avenue between the Mayo Clinic campus and Soldier Field, our large central city park, and reimagines that into an inviting and livable space, and has a real feel of, a place that people can have lunch outside and just kind of linger with their community, a parkway, if you will, that will serve pedestrians, cyclists, and traffic as well. So I will go a little further into just, here's an example of the process that they followed. So with Discovery Walk, they intentionally engaged members of specifically underrepresented communities, and they invited them into this really well thought out process. The expectation of participation was clearly spelled out at 18 hours, and it really has a great process that they followed. And I think among the many findings of this pilot program through DMC was that the process itself not only learns from the community, but it builds community. It leverages existing relationships that we may have had, and it strengthens those. And I think everybody can agree that when we get a diversity of viewpoints in any project, the end result of that project is better. And I think that was the case here with Discovery Walk. One more quick example that you may have heard of and we've alluded to a little bit is the Rochester Rapid Transit Project. The Rapid Transit Project is a 2.6 mile bus rapid transit. We're looking for a 2025 launch. We're in the small starts process right now. And I'll show you a little diagram. So this kind of outlines where we are in terms of the entire process. The timeline on the top, kind of the box shows you where we are today with what we're calling our co-design process. So very recently, the city of Rochester advertised for applications, emphasizing the desire to have people from diverse backgrounds and encourage them to apply. This is a little bit longer time frame than the Discovery Walk co-design process. These folks will have the ability to have an impact in the architectural and engineering, specifically when it comes to the design of the transit stations themselves. Because these stations will live in the neighborhoods, we decided to engage the communities in which these stations and this line will live and impact, and invite them into the process. So they will consider things like design principles and concept designs and get into the nitty gritty of saying, what are these stations going to look like? What are the programs and policies that are going to be involved around these stations? So I'm happy to report we've got a great cadre of co-designers for this project. We just had our first kickoff meeting last week. We have a nice representation of the community, all abilities, various heritage and backgrounds and vocations, everyone from students to people in the community to folks who are retired. And so far, we have to say that this has been really successful in that we're getting people who are really not only engaged in this project themselves, but also take this engagement back to their communities and have a way of being almost a conduit for information for us as we move forward with the project. And we think it's going to have a great impact on the overall feel and ownership of BRT in Rochester. And again, this co-design process is something, just a strategy that we would recommend and encourage anyone to follow. So I guess that wraps up my presentation in terms of a couple examples of strategies that we use for engagement and how we work with local government. Willing to take questions now or hold till the end?
Looks like nothing for now. But again, yep, definitely, anyone that has any questions, put it in the chat box. And we'll cover those, as needed and so forth. So thanks, Nick. Our next presenter is Emily Murray, who is the Transportation and Infrastructure Policy Analyst for the Association of Minnesota Counties. Before starting at AMC in 2016, Emily spent 2 years in the legislative division at Messerly Kramer, and prior to that worked for the Minnesota Senate for over 6 years. She earned her JD from William Mitchell College of Law and her undergraduate degree in political science from the University of Minnesota. Welcome, Emily.
All right, well, thank you, Alan, and thank you, Robin and Nick. It'll be hard to follow your two presentations, but happy to be here today and talking with all of you virtually and for those of you who are in person. Okay, so as Alan said, my name is Emily Murray and I work for the Association of Minnesota Counties. And I'm the Transportation and Infrastructure Policy Analyst there. So a lot of what I do is work with counties, county commissioners on policy issues that are of importance to all 87 counties, and work at the Minnesota legislature advocating for our priorities. All right, let's talk counties. As I just said, and as I'm sure most all of you know, Minnesota has 87 counties, but what you might not know is how many county commissioners that translates to. So there's actually 447 county commissioners in our state. Most of the county boards have five county commissioners, but there are a few county boards that have 7 county commissioners, including Olmsted. So what's AMC? We are a voluntary association representing all of Minnesota's 87 counties. Like I said, we do a lot of our work, a lot of our policy work advocating for counties at the Minnesota State Capitol. But we also provide education, training, and research resources for counties and county officials. So our mission is AMC unites Minnesota's counties to achieve public service excellence. And our vision statement is Minnesota counties are trusted partners in strengthening communities. So one thing I know everyone's kind of touched on today is this building relationships. And that's really important for us at all levels. So as county commissioners and county boards, we work a lot with other local units of government, whether it be cities or townships, school boards. And at AMC here, we work with corresponding associations that represent those local units of government. So AMC represents counties, but there's the League of Minnesota Cities and the Minnesota Association of Townships. And those two groups are, we interact with them a lot and their membership. Also building relationships at the state level, whether it be with legislators and agencies, state agencies, and other statewide elected leaders. And finally, at the federal level, a lot of our counties and county commissioners do interact at the federal level with different agencies and departments, and our association does as well. So one thing that I want to focus on today is just ways to engage with counties. So most of you maybe have already had interactions with county boards, county commissioners. Obviously, that's one tool that's, it's a direct communication with those people in themselves. But also there's county staff that are a really great tool for you to interact with at the county level. And I specifically mentioned county engineers just because I think that they're, in terms of transportation, they are typically the #1 county staff person to go to if you have any kind of transportation, transit related concerns that you'd want to talk to them about or meet with them about. I work directly with the Minnesota County Engineers Association, and I know each county has a county engineer, and they're happy to help and meet with folks. And then also another way to engage with counties is through our association, the Association of Minnesota Counties. we we spend about half of the year working on doing our policy work and preparing for the next legislative session. And then we obviously spend about the first half of the year working on that policy and advocating for our policy platform and defending some of our positions too at the state capitol. So working through our policy committees, but also AMC staff like myself. So we really break our policy work into 5 different committees, as you can see here. And the one that I staff is the Transportation and Infrastructure Policy Committee. All of our committees are made up of a commissioner from each of the 87 counties. So they're large committees, and our membership has varying levels of expertise and understanding on transportation issues. I'll focus on that because that's the one I staff. But you know, whether it be commissioners can kind of change committees that they're involved with on a yearly basis. And there's also, of course, elections where we get new commissioners every couple years. So we have varying levels of understanding and expertise, like I said, but a lot of our policy committees, a lot of this work intersects too, you know, a lot of the work that we do in the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee also intersects with environment and health and human services as well, particularly with transit. So those are our 5 committees and kind of how we structure them. Our committees typically meet 3 times a year, and those meetings coincide with conferences that our association holds. In the beginning of the year, we have a legislative conference, usually in February, and that's always during the legislative session. And we have a day at the Capitol as part of that. Then we meet in September at our policy conference. That's really where we start our policy development process for the next year. And then AMC has an annual meeting every year in December. And that's when we vote on our priorities and adopt our platform for the next year. So our committees actually just met a few weeks ago as part of our virtual policy conference this year, of course. So this is really a time where we develop, we talk about any preliminary changes to our platform, and each of our 5 committees votes on 3 priority items that we're gonna send to our AMC board. Before they get to the board, actually, our full membership votes on them during our fall district meetings that happen at the end of October and early November every year. So then finally here we have our AMC board, like I mentioned, at our annual conference in December, we'll vote to approve our priorities for the next session, and then our membership votes to approve our platform at that time. So here's just a graphic that kind of just further breaks down our legislative development process. And you might have heard me mention 2 different things, and it gets kind of confusing. But we have at the top our legislative platform development, and at the bottom our legislative priority development. So our legislative platform is a large 30-page document that really gets into the specifics of what we support, whether it be, you know, we break it down into our 5 policy committees, but then it's even further broken down in there. You know, our transportation section has transportation policy statements, but also transportation funding statements that we support. And then on the bottom, you can see kind of the path and development that our priorities take. So our priorities are different in that we have 10 to 12 every year, and they change every year. And those are the items that we are gonna focus on at the Capitol for that legislative session. So while our platform, it changes every year, but it's, you know, the core document stays the same. Our priorities might change every year depending on what some of the, you know, what are the hot topics and what are the things that we think we're going to have to face or we're hoping to have happen at the Capitol. And the one thing that we really do focus on for priorities is that they be actionable items. So in 2020, this was our transportation priority language. AMC supports continued comprehensive transportation funding that includes new revenue for roads, bridges, and transit. And so one thing that I'll just say is that this was our transportation priority for 2020. We will likely have a similar priority for 2021. But we haven't voted on those quite yet. And, you know, I said that we typically hope our priority items are actionable. And not every year, you know, we've seen a transportation funding bill in the last couple of years, but we've continued to have transportation funding be one of our top priorities simply because there's still a need out there, particularly at the local level. And we see that funding gap that we need to fill. So our priorities kind of are our broad statements, things that we really want to work on at the Capitol, but our platform is a way that we can kind of get at specific issues. And so at our policy committee meetings, when we determine these things, one thing I'll just mention is that we have, that's a time when we really look to hear from groups. Every policy committee we spend time doing our AMC business work, but we spend most of our time hearing presentations on policy issues that are important at the time, whether it be transit proposal or, you know, funding or somebody, you know, we often have representatives from MnDOT present. So there's lots of ways to get involved in our policy committee process by working with commissioners and working with county staff to help kind of navigate and mold our platform and our priorities for the following year. So as I was talking about transportation funding, obviously I'm not going to get a whole lot into transportation funding in this presentation, but just because it's one of our priorities, it's important for me to mention that while we advocate for a statewide transportation funding package, we also are really lucky to have two options at the local level that counties can implement for funding. The two options are the wheelage tax and the local option sales tax. And you can see on the right a map, and I know it's probably small, but you can see a lot of our counties have taken advantage of these options. And I wanted to specifically highlight the local option sales tax because revenue from those taxes can be used for transit, whether it be operating or capital costs. And you can see on the map that we have counties that are in blue and purple have utilized the local option sales tax. Not all of them are using it or putting their sales tax revenue from this tax towards transit, but some of them are, and it's just an option that's available. But you know, these two options aren't, they don't work for every county. As you can see, there are some that haven't implemented either, and a lot of them, it just doesn't always make sense for them. And so while these are great tools to have at our disposal, they also kind of create haves and have-nots within our membership because it doesn't always make sense for each county to put one of these forward. So that's why we always maintain our priority to advocate for a statewide transportation funding proposal with options that flow through the Highway User Tax Distribution Fund. So the other thing I just want to mention is in 2019, we started what we are calling our Bridging Divides Initiative. And this is one place where we've really looked towards public involvement to help us shape our policy on this. And so while we've had and maintained a transportation funding priority at AMC for the last several years, our membership agrees that there's a funding need, but they don't always agree on how it should be paid for or where we should get this funding from. And so we've really been working to educate our members over the last year on the different transportation funding mechanisms and really ask them to narrow down our focus on what we should be advocating for at the legislature. So the reason I mention all this is because in 2019, we focused all our work on road and bridge funding when it comes to this Bridging Divides initiative. And we worked with county engineers and MnDOT and really had presentations to educate our members on how to make sure they all know how our transportation funding system works here in Minnesota. So 2020, we were planning to focus on transit funding. In fact, we had a a board retreat to start the process to discuss our transit funding education scheduled, and that was scheduled for March 19th. And even the week prior, we thought, oh, there's no way we're going to have to cancel that. But unfortunately, we did. And so just like the rest of the world has had to shift, we had to put our Bridging Divides initiative on pause for a while, just to deal with everything that's come up due to COVID. But that doesn't mean that COVID hasn't actually highlighted the fact that we really need to talk about this even more. So I put down there, now more than ever, we need to hear from you on the impact of COVID on transit systems. So we'll be working on our Bridging Divides initiative regarding transit, continuing here in the next year. And I think this just really helps us have the educational piece, but also the hard conversations with our members to make sure that we are what we're all on the same page for what we're supporting and what we're advocating for. And that is all from me. So unless anyone has questions for me, otherwise I'll stop sharing and everyone can take questions for any of the panelists.
Thank you, Emily. I'll kind of go back to the old responses so far, but again, continue to put anything that you want to talk about in the chat box. First off, from Amber, thanks, Robin. It's convenient that you're able to provide a service, and that was a service and reduced rate. And then also Amber is talking to Nick. The IAP2 is a good tool. Nick, with DMC, how is RPT supporting TOD and increased transit service for people who work in medical services, but maybe more transit dependent? And what is RPT hearing through engagement for transit needs with DMC?
Good question. Actually, there's a lot of three-letter acronyms there, a lot of TLAs. Transit-oriented development is a great illustration of the partnership between DMC, the county, the city, RPT. So DMC funded a fairly significant study. We also got some grant funding from FTA to fund a TOD study along the 2.6 mile corridor of the Rapid Transit Project. So as part of that study, the team took a look at the ROCOG long-range transportation planning, the city-county planning efforts. It also took data inputs from RPT as it developed what they thought would be their recommendations for the transit-oriented. But then what happened sort of on the backside is, so they came up with their recommendations along the corridor, along the 8 stops along the way of potential opportunities for development along this corridor. And then that report came back in front of the DMCC board and the city council. And both of those bodies approved the report and sort of by doing so took those recommendations, those planning recommendations, and incorporated those sort of into these other long range and transit planning efforts that are going on. So that sort of becomes policy that informs us, that comes back around to us as a transit system. That becomes policy, and it becomes back to that first leg of the stool I talked about. So it's really a great example of how that sort of all can work together to take what's these big initiatives and advance them. Just regarding the specific question on healthcare workers, healthcare workers, they make up about 60% of our daily commuting ridership. So, maybe even 60 to 70%. And so we're really tuned into the needs of Mayo Clinic patient care staff in particular. A lot of our emergency service plans revolve around getting essential workers to where they need to be. And whether that's a snow event in the winter or COVID-19 when we had to sort of quickly and dramatically reduce our service, the needs of those essential workers was high on the priority list. And so we're in constant communication with Mayo Clinic and with other essential workers around the area. So, yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Nick. Do have a question for Emily. With AMC looking at transit as a priority statewide, I'm curious what the narrative is around supporting transit. In other words, climate, increased mobility, decreased road maintenance.
Yeah, I would say all three of those are items and reasons why we support transit statewide. And we always have supported transit, but we know there's varying levels of transit in our 87 counties, different needs for different counties, of course, different populations. But I think there's a need in every county for it. And so really, making it a priority, it always has been, but what we really need to do is just educate our members on all those things, reasons why it continues to be a priority for us, but also one of the bigger things is just helping them understand how transit's funded, what are the different systems across the state. I mentioned this earlier, but our commissioners have a varying level of expertise when it comes to transportation, transit issues. And, some of them, they know what works in their county, but they might not know and understand what works in another county. Even though they support it, they don't always know all the details about it. So just really educating each other on those aspects, but also just helping them understand how it's funded so that we can better advocate at the Capitol for transit. I hope that helps answer the question.
Nope, sounds good. Don't see anything else in the chat box. I actually have a question for the whole panel, if you want to take turns answering it. Just as we've kind of changed, we've actually kind of done a hybrid conference this year, both in person and virtual. How do you see each of your areas, I guess best way to call it is your new normal? What things have now changed that you think will continue to use post-COVID?
I'm happy to start. I guess I didn't realize I was still off mute, so I'm sorry. Okay, so I'll just say we've obviously had to change a lot. We've moved all of our conferences to virtual, both our fall policy conference that we just had and our annual conference that'll be held in December, which, I think our membership is, really hoping to be able to get together in person in the near future, but we've had to learn and kind of adapt and take on this new virtual world, of course. We have, I would say, I've talked about this now a couple times, varying levels of expertise on different issues, but also including technology. And a lot of our counties weren't using a lot of technology options prior to all this. And so it's been a really important time, I think, for them to kind of see what options are available for staff. And it's really kind of allowed this new working situation to happen even at the county level. And there's been several other things that counties have learned and adapted to, taking electronic signatures for things. That's something a lot of counties never did before this. But we have really kind of studied all the changes that we've implemented since March. We've put together a blue ribbon committee to really address what changes have been made, which ones worked for the better, and that we want to implement going forward, even when things are a little bit more back to normal.
I can go next. I think for us, maybe I'll mention two things. One, I think with a lot of folks working from home, I think it's provided staff with maybe a little bit more flexibility. So like a lot of the outreach coordinators that I showed on the map, a lot of them actually live in the communities or close to the communities that they serve or work with. So instead of having to, come into the office and then go back and come in and go back, they're able to, maybe work from home, and then they're able to just like run out and check on a project or meet with the community or have coffee with somebody. So it's actually reduced some of their travel time and work, travel time and things like that. given them some more flexibility. The other one is, I think it's really, as Emily mentioned, it's really kind of challenging how we've been doing things. And we've significantly reduced amount of print materials that we do, which, you know, to focus more on the electronic and different kind of media. So I think that's, you know, as you're thinking about sustainability and just the cost of a lot of, you know, colored brochures and things like that, I think it's allowed us to do more with social media and electronic and different other types of communications.
I think we might have lost Nick. Nick, you still there? Well, I still got another question for Emily. Can you expound a bit on the local sales tax funding option for the payment of transit improvement projects? Is this a supplementary option? And how is this funding option enacted or requested?
Yeah, okay, so the language that I included on my slide, it was taken directly from statute. So these are options that are available to counties. I think it was the year 2013 when they took away the referendum that was needed to put in place either of these options. And so now a county board needs to have, it's just a board resolution to pass this. But there's a lot of work that goes into it on the back end. You know, there's community engagement that they have. They have to designate the project before, and it's stated in the resolution, what they're going to be putting the, particularly for the local option sales tax, what they're going to be putting that sales tax money for. So what's the project? And it's put in place that way. So it runs through the Department of Revenue has a list too of, they kind of keep the resolutions that all the counties have passed and which projects they're putting their money to. And like I said, our website has more information. You can find that map on our website and kind of more of a breakdown as to how those options are put in place. But also happy to answer any other questions offline too.
Thanks. Again, great job, panelists. This is again a topic I think that a lot of us sometimes fear, right? How to engage the electeds and those types of things. So again, learning that whole process is a great tool, and I think you guys taught us many tools that are out there. So unless there's any other questions or comments, we are a little bit over time, but otherwise, thank you very much again, Robin and Emily. I think, like I said, I think we lost Nick. So, but thank you for your time today, and have yourself a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye now.
Bye, thank you.